cloud. Okay. Great. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody to this question and answer with Pennsylvania State Parks and Pennsylvania State Forest as it relates to, oops, got a couple more people coming in, to trails and trail maintenance and trail work. With us tonight, we have Matt Crosbie from the Bureau of Forestry and Paula Devore, park manager with the Bureau of State Parks. So Matt and Paula, if you want to take a minute to introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly, maybe tell them what your role is so that they have an idea. So we'll start with you, Paula.
Okay.
Also known as sales.
I know it's my personal computer, and it's a long story. We like to sail, I'll tell you that part. Yes, I am the trail coordinator for the Bureau of State Parks. I cover the entire state, and it's hard to do it well because it's a big state with lots of trails. But I basically help the park managers if they want to move a trail around, help in the layout and the design, where they need to fix problems. My background is in landscape design, so that kind of melds into, as far as proper drainage and things like that you even do around a house if you were building or putting in gardens or something like that. So that's kind of how I got into this with state parks. I've been doing this for I'm in my 19th year, I think, with state parks. So I've been doing it for a while, and I don't know what else to tell you.
Excellent. Well, that works, Paula. And so Matt, would you like to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about what you do for the Bureau of Forestry?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I seem to be having a little trouble with the video. I'll mess with that again here, but I'm with the recreation section in central office, and I support the 20 forest districts on recreation projects. I have a focus on non-motorized recreation and help with project planning, funding, help with policies and planning, guidelines, all that kind of thing, out of central office here. So looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. And hopefully your camera will come on. If not, we can hear you loud and clear. So we'll do this as a Q&A. I gave them a few questions in case there was a lack of any questions, but seeing this crowd, I am sure there is not going to be a lack of questions.
Just be nice.
So, be nice. So if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we'll call on you, and we'll launch in with the question.
So, good afternoon, Paula. This is Jim Ugar. I'm with the Friends of Pinchot, and I met you once before.
Yes.
But I was out walking the trails here this spring, and we've got the park is fairly old. Some of these trails, particularly the ones that are going essentially straight up, and this came up with the other gentleman earlier too. I looked at him. He discouraged water bars. Some of them you can't put water bars in. It's just too steep and too rutted to allow you to reasonably do that. Some of them we can. I'm looking for any suggestions other than relocating the trails, which may be what needs to be done. There needs to probably be some switchbacks. And if that's the case, and I'm sure somebody else is going to ask, what are the steps we need to do that?
Good question. Yes, first of all, almost I'd say 95% of our trails we inherited because we take over people's land, and it was where the deer went or their families walked or something. So they weren't made sustainably to start with. So we're basically going backwards and trying to fix a lot of mistakes. If a trail's going up and it's rutted, it should be rerouted. There's no other way around it. It's not built sustainably. It needs to be built correctly. The process for state parks, I think Forestry does it differently. For state parks, you always start with the park manager, tell them what you think needs to be done. They will either decide that, yeah, that's worth doing right now, or it's not a priority, or, they'll discuss it with you. And if they think it's a priority, they will fill out a form called the R3, which is Resource Recreational Review. And I can share that. Can I put that up? Is there a way
Yeah,
I can-
absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know how to do this because I don't do Zoom very much.
If you see on the button in the middle and the bottom, it says share, it's
Yeah.
green with an arrow.
Okay,
That would
let me
be very
put it up.
helpful, I think.
Let me put this up and if I can get it up. Okay. And then share screen. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what the park manager, and sometimes they'll ask if it's a group of people that might know the project better. They'll ask them to fill it out and then they might tweak it before it goes on to the region who has to also approve it if they think it's worthwhile. And then that comes into our office in the planning section. So basically, like obviously, you know, you put down who's in charge of it. And the region has to approve it. And then this goes through all these different, we have a meeting and it goes through all these different divisions, from maintenance to planning to outdoor programming services in case it might need a key, you know, some kind of educational information depending on what the project is. Both the assistant directors, the bureau director, they all sign off on this with this meeting. If it affects the reservations, which some projects, this is for all kind of projects, not just trails, it might affect reservations. So that's all done. If we have to get a facility design and construction involved, that's on there. Other people so we go through all these people that are involved. And that's the final part, but this is what they fill in, the project description, which can go on for as long as you want it. It keeps, you know, you can keep typing in the basic area where it starts, at least if it's a trailhead. That's what I would put down for a trail. Let's see. And then if it's going to help like they look at all these things, like, is it going to help our resources? Is this worth putting our time into? What's the justification for this project? And then how's it going to affect the actual resource? And is it going to degrade it more? Are we actually going to be making more issues than helping the issue? So they go into that. Timeline, we always like these presented. We'd like to see them presented almost a year in advance, because sometimes it takes a while for us to get these meetings because we get a lot of these, and try to get the top people all in the same room for an hour is not easy. So we do it like some people will say this spring, like they'll send it to me today and they'll say this spring. Sometimes that doesn't always happen because it's just too short of a notice. If there's other people involved, like, you know, if Marcy's group's involved, or if there's other friends groups or something, that, you know, that would go in there. If it's other external partners, sometimes it can be a township. We're doing a lot on the eastern side with townships connecting to our state parks. So those people would all be listed in there. The PNDI, I assume a lot of you probably already know what this is. It's where we look at the natural resources, and it goes to fish and boat. I've seen this enough times I shouldn't have off my head. DCNR, which is actually what goes into forestry, not parks. DCNR looks at for special plants. Let me see. I think it's a fish and boat. Who am I missing? Blank all of a sudden. There's 4 agencies they go to. And then they come back and it'll either say it clears or it doesn't clear. And then if it doesn't clear, we have to then go and put in a letter of why we're doing this, and they have to approve it. Sometimes they have to do a field visit, which again slows up the project because they got to get that on their calendar and work with us to meet them out there. So that's all. So that's just the PNDI part. And then something that we're also doing that isn't on this form, but whenever we get the R3s in, that we're calling them R3s, then we also have now the cultural resources that are part of state parks and forests, that we have these 2 ladies, Angie and April. Angie's the underground and April's above ground for historical resources, you know, the cultural resources that we would want to preserve. And so they have to look at it. And sometimes that, if it's in an area that could have had, according to the places where they go to look up their information, that shows that there was historical, especially out in the eastern side of Pennsylvania, there's a lot of historical things that go on. They have to actually do a dig then to see if maybe there was something there, like maybe there was an encampment or something. And so that could add months to a year to the project if we have to go through that part. So I know sometimes people get like, they're like, why is this taking so long? But there's all these different steps. So And then we also look like at the public and social consideration. Like, is this something that is going to upset the neighbors next door because there's this big neighborhood and we're getting too close to the property line? Do we need to talk to them and have a social meeting at the town hall or whatever? So those are all things that they go through. And then they brought in the pictures if there's things to do. We shorten this up a lot. And they go into details of looking at all the different pieces of what we're protecting for the people. So they look at all these things, like it's even not so much with walking trails, but if you get into other trails that have sometimes even mountain bikes can get into being noisy for some people, and then there's even conflicts between horses and mountain biking. We don't get into really the motorized recreation in parks like they do in forestry, but these are all things we have to look at, because again, this is for more than just trails. This would be anything they're putting in a amphitheater or something like that. They'd go through this process. So these are all things that we look at. And we want to make sure, like if we get into caves and stuff like geology, we have to actually bring in TopoGeo, and they look at this as well. So this is what slows this all down. And this is why the process takes so long. Once this is approved, though, then everything, when it's okay, then we can go ahead and move on and actually start doing the work. And then that's, lots of times that'll be the friends groups. I mean, probably more than not. And that's pretty much the end. That's the last part of it. So that's what, how to stop sharing. Stop sharing, there it is. So that's how that all works for state parks. Does anybody have any questions? Because that's a lot to cover real fast there. So that's what we do in the background when we're in Harrisburg with all the red tape. So that's the truth.
I see Andre has his hand up. So
okay, I can't see everybody because of it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andre.
This is Andre from the Friends of Pine Grove Furnace. The question has to do with, if you will, the threshold or the trigger for this. When you've got a reroute that's, parallel to an existing trail and you want to move it, and I mean this quite literally, 5 or 10 feet to avoid, say, a new tree that fell over and the root balls disturbed the soil, whatever, and you need to reroute, 25 yards. And on the new proposed routing, you could reach over with your foot or perhaps with your trail tool and hit the treadway from the previous route of the trail. Do you still need to go through this? Because this is, quite a process for what we on the ground might think of as a pretty minor fix for a trail problem.
It's really a case-by-case basis. Sometimes that I don't have them up right. My computer went down on this side, but we do have like a kind of a guideline. I think I'm trying to remember how far, like if it's within 5 feet, it's only like, I'd have to look it up. I don't want to quote myself on this one, but it's like if it's 15 feet, then you just move it. But if it's really starting to get longer, and especially if it's wet spots, and this the one thing I didn't bring in is DEP. DEP lots of times now, every time there's a place that could be a wetland, they have to review this as well. And then it gets into permitting. We actually have to get permits from DEP, and we've been denied. We've been denied even putting a boardwalk down just so we could keep people dry above the wetland and actually be like this, but now they can see what the wetland plans look like. And we were told, no, we can't do it because it's disturbing it. So I can't just say in a blanket. I mean, people have to come out and look at it, and just when we see it, we could tell you, yeah, you can go ahead and do it, or no, we got to go through the process.
And Paula, would that have to be you that would make that assessment, or are there other people that
no, it's
you're one
me.
person?
It's only me. I mean, the park manager they have the information there, and they can tell if they're supposed to, go further with that. But almost any time, the R3 is basically the ruling is if you're doing a project and you're disturbing the ground, you're supposed to do the R3. Because every time you're moving the ground around, you're affecting nature. I mean, in some way, it could be a turtle or whatever. It could be anything. And we also have to be careful too, that a few feet isn't going to show up on a map, but then we get into even if we start, redoing trails where the mapping is going to be off, we got to work with the mapping department. So there's a lot of nuances to this. It's not just as simple as, we have a muddy spot, let's work around it. And sometimes when we just work around it, we're not really solving the problem because we're not figuring out why is it muddy to start with. So that's another part of it.
So what I'm hearing is, yep, I got you, Gary. What I'm hearing is, check with the manager, and it might be that it's just not troublesome. It's just, a couple of feet and for a short period of time. But if it looks like you have a reroute, you really want to make sure that you give yourself at least a year and, practice patience. And if the more that you can assist with gathering the data to help fill in the application, that would be beneficial to the park manager. Okay, Gary.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to call on Gary, but go ahead, Paula.
No, I was just going to say that's right. That's all. I was just agreeing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Gary Sawyer with the Friends of Ridley Creek. And Paula, I'm glad you showed that because it does bring up a lot of thoughts that wouldn't have occurred to me to consider, how close you are to a neighbor's boundary, that sort of a thing. I think a lot of the reroutes that we're interested in doing, as Andre had suggested, they're kind of short-term fixes for an immediate problem and also safety issues. And maybe that's something that would be on your form as well. That, for example, we had a significant part of the trail fall into Ridley Creek a few years ago in a flood. And at significant risk of people trying to work their way around, the rangers decided to reroute the trail. I'm sure they didn't go to the R3 process to do that. It's now been established. It's now been established as part of the trail system. We had a recordable injury at a very spot where we're trying to get a trail permit to mitigate that where that occurred. So I think having something that's, maybe the park manager can do the first pass. They know more about these forms. They can say, okay, well, we can do a temporary fix for safety concern, or no, we need to really think about this and, plan on a year before we can open up the trail again.
Yeah, and Lexi works a lot with us. I mean, she's probably one of the most proactive,
Yeah.
the managers for the trails. I know she's trying to get is it the Yellow Trail? She's trying to get a bridge across the Yellow Trail. It comes to my, I'm not sure I have that right, but that's what's in my brain. And that one, this is another thing, is when we get to the DEP permitting, we have to get FD&C involved, and they've had turnover, and we're kind of in a limbo right now. We don't know who we're supposed to go to do the DEP permitting, because we were just working on that like the last couple of weeks. So it slows it all down. There was a really good guy, but they made a mistake and they promoted him. So he's not there anymore for us. So, unfortunately, I keep trying to pull him back, but he won't come back.
So Paula, is there a place where friends can see this form just so they're informed? Not that they would be filling it out and completing it, but just so they have an idea? Or is there any way to just kind of like send that we could have some bullets and saying, like, if you're thinking about this, this is what it takes. The conversation starts with your park manager, but these are the considerations that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I can make up something for you to hand out to people. That's an internal document and we keep tweaking it. So like it might be different in a week because we're finding out some things as we're working on this. There are things that we keep adding, like everybody makes the same comment each time. I'm like, well, rather than doing that, let's just remind the manager to make sure they let the mapping section know that they need to redo the map, things like that, instead of having somebody write it in every time. So we keep tweaking it like that, but the basics, I can write something up for you guys.
I think that would be
I don't
very
have it
helpful.
anywhere. We don't have that out there. I mean, I can make something though. I'll make a note for that.
Okay, I think that would be helpful because it would, one, allow them to be thinking about, this process and how they can assist their park manager. Two, it also helps them to understand the complexity so that, if it takes a little while, it's not just because, people are dragging their feet. You're engaging with other agencies. There are things that have to happen. There are clearances that have to occur. So.
Right. Yeah, it can be, and the DEP permitting itself, and that's just one part of it, that can, depending on what it is, it could take up to a year. So and that's on top of what we are already doing. So it gets lengthy. And a lot of the townships we work with, because they're hiring consultants and they're trying to connect us, and all that it can take 10 years to get these connections to work. I mean, it's really involved.
Yes. So Jim, before I call on you, I'd like to give Matt a chance to answer from the forestry side, and then we'll circle back to you if that's okay.
Okay.
So Matt, do you want to talk a little bit if there's a reroute needed in forestry, what the process is?
Yeah, so it's very similar to that. We have what's called a State Forest Environmental Review, an SFER. It is pretty much the same framework and covers all the concerns of, plant and animal species, wetlands, that kind of thing. Also electric and other utility right-of-ways, access, user conflict, and we're also big on landscape goals and whether it fits into our management plans in the long term, considering the effect on visitor experience and things like that. So, but it could be a lengthy process as well. As she said, it would start with the local manager, district forester, and they would be able to make the call whether or not need an SFER. The example where you're moving around an obstacle in the trail like that really wouldn't require an SFER on our end, but more of a significant planned out relocation of to avoid a large wet area. It might go like a quarter mile or something like that. You definitely would probably need an SFER, but not a whole lot to add. She covered the same kind of things that we look at, just kind of a different format and different people to review. It is posted then internally, where all the specialists and managers can take a look at too, see if anything jumps out at them, and then it's eventually signed off on by the state forester and before work can begin.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask the loaded question because I'm looking at the different folks here, and Don, I see you, but Jim is going to be ahead of you. And that is what happens, because a lot of the folks here, they have forests surrounding their park. What happens if the trail is in both the park and the forest? Does this have to be replicated using the two different forms? Is there a coordinated process for that?
I don't think I've ever had that happen, actually.
Yeah. I've never seen a joint SFER either. Yeah.
Well, I hope I didn't conjure it for you. Sorry if I did. So Jim, go ahead. You had a question, Jim Huger.
Sure, Paula, given the, in reference a major reroute of a trail, it takes a lot of extensive effort to do that because you got switchbacks involved and blah, blah, blah. How long would an approved form be good for?
It's good. It's not like the PNDI has a 2-year time frame, but whenever we approve that you can do the trail, there's not like a limit, like you have to have it done in a year or something like that.
Good question.
Yeah, we don't want to add that either. We don't you have to have something done because that would make things even more confusing. No,
Yes.
it's once it's approved, maybe people even have to raise money, and they might need a year or two to raise the money if they're going to put a bridge in it or something, So it's just need to be, we just want to make sure that we know what is going on out there and that it isn't hurting the resource.
Thank you. Don Horn, you had raised your hand.
Yeah.
If you can introduce yourself.
Late, so I missed some of this, but what if you want to widen your trail a little bit to make it more accessible?
So Don is in a forest.
Yeah.
So
forestry.
yeah. So Matt.
For something like that, I think it would depend on the scope, the width and length that you're looking at improving, and what kind of, if you're bringing in materials or utilizing machinery. If you're looking at just widening it a couple feet with hand tools, I think you could probably work with the recreation forester to figure that out. But if you're talking like changing a footpath to an ADA trail and bringing in equipment and stone and stuff, that would probably require an
Now, I'm not
SFER.
looking at an ADA trail,
Okay.
but I've ran into this with some other classes whenever I've been taking, and they're saying about making things accessible. And then letting the folks know either out at the trailhead or something that, look, there's a bridge 3 miles up and it's 1 step to get up, or 2 steps, to let the people know that, hey, I can go 3 miles and come back, but I'm not going to be able to go straight through. And they're looking, it's just making things more accessible, even though you're not going to an ADA level. And they said they want to be able to go and do the same trails that everybody else does, except for ones, you get into the class 3 and stuff. 3 or 1, whichever the worst is.
Matt, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's a good idea to improve communications about what the specs of the trail are and how far they can expect to go, and things like that. Yeah, if you're just improving it to make it a little bit easier, usually that would just be worked through with the rec forester to plan a project. If that answers the question.
Someone, yeah.
Okay. And speaking of equipment, we'll acknowledge that Don Horn, the Friends of Michaud, just purchased one of those walk behind little dump trucks for building some trail building down there in the Michaud. Other questions? And if you don't want to, if you're unable to unmute yourself, if you want to put it in the chat, I'm happy to relay it. I know, Terry, you had one on the previous workshop that I said that would be more in line with a conversation with Paula and Matt. Did you have that question answered, or do you still have a question?
No, that was a very detailed and good answer from my point of view with Paula. And the question that I had is, when do we? The takeaway is we go talk to the park manager and let it go from there. But yeah, we have trails that go through wet areas and bridges that are deteriorating, and a very active trail crew. But it was an answer that resolved all those questions for me. We just go to the park manager.
Yeah, and I think too, if it's a matter of you're just adding fresh aggregate, things like that, you don't have to go through the R3 process. It's when you start moving earth and dirt, and that's when we have to go through that. A lot of it, our hands are tied to a DEP on a lot of the wet areas where it's getting tougher. They're being more, especially in the eastern side, they're a little tougher than on the western side.
No, I wanna put out, we had talked a little bit with our conversations with Peter in terms of wet area and doing turnpiking and, working with the tread. I know that, State Parks is trying to move away from water bars. Are they acceptable as a short-term solution, to prevent issues like people walking around and widening a trail, or what's the approach that Parks is looking at?
Well, I like to see the I call them like the reverse grade, the dips and they should be at least 10 or 15 feet long. I've seen people put it looks like a ditch. You don't want that. You want it to be long and just slowly, it's like a contact lens. If you cut it in half and you turn it upside down, where it's wide, can you guys see my hands? It's wide here and it goes shallower, but then where it dips, that water's going to flow, unless you already, this is so hard to explain because every trail is going to be different. But if you're not in a flat area that's just was a swamp and you're putting a trail through it, if this is actually somewhere where it could drain, that should work. It's going to take a little more muscle for a few hours, but then it's done. It's not like your water bars, it takes a lot of maintenance. You have to clean them out every year, or maybe sometimes more. They can be tripping hazards, so we try to avoid them.
And what did you
I mean,
call that? A trail? What was the term you used? For the dip, for the upside down
It's
contact
like
lens?
it's a reverse grade. There's two things. There's a reverse grade and there's the rolling dip. I mean, there's different terms they use on. IMBA has, I mean, I go by the IMBA standards. They're the best ones that are sustainable because they like to build trails and then go and enjoy them. They don't want to be out there maintaining them, and they're very sustainable trail builders. And Peter Jensen's a great trail. I took his class up in Vermont, and it was in New Hampshire, but he's a great trail builder. But they do it that it's done and you do it right. You shouldn't have to, if you're going to be out there working on it, you must just do it right the first time, in my opinion. Water bars are not, they're not sustainable.
Okay, but this is that, so like with the trail workshop that Peter's doing, that is something that he could demonstrate that people could go back and use as a way to address wet areas. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jim, I think I saw your hand up again, Jim Huger.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully I can remember my question now. It's just, with the effort that takes to do some of this stuff and the fact that the governor's put more money in his budget for trail maintenance, how does the park pick up projects that need to be done? Is there a submission process? I'm not sure whether I'm making myself clear or not.
Yeah. This is all new, so I'm not really sure how they're going to do this yet. They've hired, they're hiring. I don't know if they've hired them yet. They're hiring people to work on these trails. I don't know. I should be, but I'm not involved in it. So I don't know. I don't even know how they're going to be divided out or how they're going to decide where they're going. But they've really put a lot of money, and I don't know how many positions into doing this kind of maintenance. That is still it's still in the works. So I can't even tell you how that's going to pan out.
And I will say the governor's funding is just a proposal. So if you want to support that, please write your elected official and encourage them to support the governor's allocated budget for DCNR, as well as the $5 million that would be recurring for trails and improvements, as well as the new state park. So it's never a done deal. It's the governor proposes, and then the General Assembly has to decide whether or not they're going to go with that.
Another thing too, that might help some of you, if you have larger projects, and the park manager can put this in, is with the PAOC, Pennsylvania Outdoor Corps. That's another year in advance that we try to do. But if there's a big project, these children are, I shouldn't call them children, but to me they're kids. they're anybody could have given birth to as a child. But they are hired for this, and it's a training process for them, and a lot of skill training for them. They learn a lot of things, but there are ones that go out on the trails and they learn how to do the trails. And I think we're kind of getting to a point where the leaders understand how we want the trails to be done. So it's getting to be better. And that program is just growing like crazy. So if there's something that's way too much for you to handle, let the park manager know, and she can get it on the list. And if it's one that's approved, then they'll be sending people out. They can be out there for 2 weeks with people that are younger and have more, they can go all day long with shovels and they don't get tired.
And I would add, if you have the Pennsylvania Outdoor Corps in your park or in your forest, introduce yourself to them. Build a relationship, because they are potentially volunteers for you after they complete their stint in the Outdoor Corps. A lot of them, may be looking for additional opportunities to develop their skills. So I'm just going to plant that seed for you all. And then I see that Dan Mumford is waving to me. So Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Dan Mumford, Friends of World's End State Park. Last year, DCNR built the first mountain bike trails right outside the park. And I looked at the map they created for those trails, and, there's information on there. But one of the pieces of information missing that I was wondering about is, what's the status of e-bikes on that kind of trail? And how do I go about determining that? Because basically I'm planning on writing a article for our newsletter about that trail. And I'm sure that's a question people are gonna have. And I'm not sure what to say.
Hey, this was outside of the state park?
It's just
Where?
outside of the state park. It's in Loyalsock State Forest.
Okay,
But
so it's a forest.
outside the, yeah, it's a forestry
Okay.
park, Loyalsock State Forest, but it's right outside the park.
Okay, so that might be a question for Matt.
For Matt, maybe for that one.
Yeah, it would follow the department policy of if it's open to bikes, it's open to e-bikes within those certain specifications. And we do have, some FAQs and stuff on the DCNR website. That would be a good resource. Also talking to the district forester to make sure there aren't any further restrictions on any of the trails for whatever reason. And I'd be glad to help review any article or anything, but yeah, it's generally speaking, all mountain bike trails will be open to e-bikes. I think it's, I don't have memorized off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah, I know there's various classifications of e-bikes, and sometimes the rules make distinctions between those classifications. So you're saying that information is somewhere on DCNR's website. I just have to look around.
Yeah, I can get Marcy to get to you. Yeah, it got a little more complex as far as classes goes, I'd say, with this current policy. It's not so much by class, because that's continually changing, but more by specification.
What do you mean by
wattage,
specification?
weight and wattage mainly. One thing is that you can't use it as throttle only. It's you have to use the pedal assist. That's the big distinction there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think there was something too, which is true with any of them, is the speed. I think, and it's really hard for us to, it's hard's not even the right word, for us to, monitor this and have rangers out there if people are going too fast or not. It's a very difficult subject, and they spent years trying to figure out this policy because there's just so many nuances to it. So
Yeah, I know
hard.
it's a difficult subject. I mean, I'm a member of a number of cycling Facebook groups, and if you want to watch it blow up, just mention electronic bikes.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just, people get real hot real quick.
Yeah. Doug had his hand up first on, and then also Matt put the e-bikes in Pennsylvania Parks and Forest link in the chat box. So feel free to grab that. And then Dan, I heard Matt say he'd be happy to review what you wrote. Doug.
Okay, my question's a little bit different from what we've been talking about. I'm certified through the National Forest for like Swamper. Is there a way to be certified through the parks with that? Or do you got to go actually through the parks training to be certified as like a swamper?
A swamper?
Yeah,
So
that's like a
swamper is the
chainsaw assistant.
Yeah, it's a chainsaw assistant. So we have, because you're part of a friends group, we have the requirements for certification, and typically it is not a training with a park maintenance person. It is with a certified instructor, and we will be offering some more trainings this year for that.
Okay, but by being certified through the national park, like I'm certified for the Allegheny National Forest, that doesn't.
If you have an A&F card to be a sawyer, I mean, are you talking about to swamp or to saw?
Swamp.
Yeah, you're fine if you have it through A&F, because we're using the U.S. Forest Service standard for our trainers.
Okay, that was my big question. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Don Horn, I saw you had your hand up. You're muted, so you're muted.
I'm done.
Okay.
I got to remember the question now, but with the e-bikes, I ran into a situation. I mean, not really a situation. I talked to a gentleman. He was very nice and whatever. He actually test rides e-bikes in the Michelle State Forest. And I seen him that day. He was riding an ATV trail. He says the bike trails, the tires that he used are a little wider tire, would throw him all over the place if he was on a bike trail instead of the ATV trails. He says he's ran or has rode there before with the ATVs and never had an issue with any of them. They all stop, talk to each other. You know, he gets right away. So, I mean, where are you going to fall at with that? I mean, it's just he has a wider tire than the other folks. And that's where it's safer actually for him to do an ATV trail than a bike trail.
I mean, that I'm
Is
looking at Matt, because that's a
Yeah.
forest.
I was gonna say, I don't know what to tell you on that one.
Yeah, that's getting into some of those nuances that were mentioned during the development of the e-bike policy and things like that, and when does it push the bounds of being motorized and that kind of thing. But if it fits the other specifications, which I have up now, if it's less than 100 pounds and no more than 750 watt motor, and they're using the pedals, there's no real reg there for the size of the tire. But and our motorized trails are generally open to non-motorized use, unless posted closed. So you generally probably be okay, but you'd have to check with the district manager.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you,
posting those links. That is what I was looking for. So thanks.
Yep.
Yeah. Opening up to other questions. Gary.
Now, this might be a little specific, but perhaps it touches on something that comes up from time to time. We've got a number of 16-foot span bridges that have washed away. We've replaced them. There's one that I see as being in threat of being washed away the next major flood that we have. And we're considering, or at least in my mind, at least there's two options. One is a moderately significant trail reroute with another bridge. But the option to perhaps save the bridge is to install some gabions in the creek. So didn't know if you had any, precautionary thoughts about
No
that.
Gabions.
No gabions. Okay,
No
we'll have to
gabions.
we'll reroute the trail then. That's
I mean,
we'll probably have to put in an R3 for that.
Well, definitely. I mean, anytime you hit the banks or the bed of a waterway, DEP's involved. As Parks is concerned, we don't want gabions because they fail eventually and they don't look natural. We want to keep it as natural as possible. We have done rock armoring once it's been approved by DEP. They don't like to use, we can't use those words when we do the permit because it means something else to them. But that's what I call it when you armor the edges, the sides, the banks, so that you deter flooding or wash out more like the erosion. And you guys, you have had some really flashy storms down there. I mean, they've been pretty bad. But yeah, Notre Dame baskets. And I know there's one over at Michaud that's along the Appalachian Trail that we've been looking at this washout 7 or 8 years. And the Appalachian Trail people have gotten a grant. It's just trying to come up with a design that's aesthetic as well as, good for the environment. It's just, I'm not sure if it's ever going to happen. It's really hard, and it's hard to get somebody out there to do that kind of work too, because it was a pretty bad washout. But yeah, we try to anything that is man-made, we avoid. I mean, besides a bridge, because that's man-made looking, but we try to avoid anything that's and then we do any rock, it should be indigenous to that area and not something that was brought in from a quarry that doesn't match. So.
Yeah, and there are a lot of work. I think the stretch that we're looking at, I was calculating several tons of material. And if it's collected locally, that would be impactful as well. So, we were weighing it. I just didn't know if you had an opinion on that versus a a rather significant reroute at a different crossing that's not at such a risk of washing away. So, but that answers the question. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think we know what to do.
Yeah, we've had a lot of parks with the weather changing and these severe storms that have lost a lot of bridges, a lot of trails. And the only thing we can do is reroute and maybe find a higher area where we can put a bridge across that may not be as affected. But it's a problem. It's not, and it's not just one park, it's all across the state.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed. Thank you.
So there was a question that was presented and it was just one word. And the word is snakes. So, Paula, Matt, there's the one word question that was somebody emailed.
I don't know, Matt, if you want to, I did ask about this because you had said that, but go ahead, Matt, you see what you would say.
Yeah, that's something we encounter a lot in the state forest. So, yeah, generally speaking, they're pretty harmless if you don't mess with them. If you encounter one on the trail, give it some time to get off, and if it's not, then unfortunately you're gonna have to go off the trail and out and around. But while of course being careful, watching for others. A lot of times they're more known to be at the the basking or denning sites, which are sometimes at a lot of our trail vistas. So good suggestion is always be careful when you're coming up on a vista during summer, because you don't want to sit down on a rock and be surprised in that way. So, but yeah, and you have to be a little careful about spreading their location, where they're located as well, because there are people who would go out and mess with them. So yeah, if something were to happen, snake bite kits and stuff aren't really the answer. You gotta get yourself out of there as soon as possible. Hopefully able to get through to 911 and yeah, don't mess with the wound is the best advice. I don't know if there was anything further to it.
I would add, that if you're working in the area, you feel you need to move it, you can't move it far because they have a very small range. So maybe work on that section tomorrow.
That's when I asked over in operations, and they were saying that a couple of people, but they said, if it is a concern and you want it moved, go to a ranger. They know how to do it properly. They have the equipment. They'll just at least get it out of your way, but don't play with it. We tend to, like, the biggest thing we want to do is try to just let them go if you can, and not go work in a different section if you have to get something done that day. If you absolutely have to work right there, get a ranger to take care of it. Don't try to do it yourself. Also be cognizant of what the weather is different times of year, and when things are going to be pulled out, like if it's the sunny, spring morning, or the, summer where they're going to be sitting out sunning. Just think about those things before you go out, because we don't want somebody getting bitten. And I know that the little story at King's Gap, they have weddings there, and there was a rattlesnake sitting up on the wall, in the area where they have their cocktails or whatever. I don't know what they were doing, but they were saying, "Can you get rid of that rattlesnake?" And they're like, "No, he lives here." So they just they sort of guarded the rattlesnake, but let the wedding go on. So.
Yeah, I know a story at King's Gap too, where the rattlesnake, they'd move it and he'd come back. There was a concert, so I guess he liked the music.
Rockin' rattlesnake.
There had been a question before too that somebody had sent relating to what factors are involved in determining whether or not to remove leaf litter from established trails.
I don't have any problem with that. It's actually keeps it drier. You shouldn't put chips down. If you have leaves in there, you can get them out of the way. You need to keep the trail dry.
Matt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for parks. For us, we have so much mileage of trails that trying to, keep them free of leaves would be a big undertaking. It makes sense in some of our high use areas, especially if you're like on a side hill or something where it'd be easy to misjudge your step if it's really covered with leaves. So that's an important location to consider. And some ways, it doesn't hurt to have the leaf litter most of the time. But if it also is a newer trail and the footpath isn't well established and it's covered with leaves, it's going to be even all the more hard to follow. So, those first few years might definitely be helpful to do so. And in doing so, it also suggests considering the setting, location, and timing if you're going to be using something like a leaf blower. Probably don't want to be out blowing leaves on a nice sunny Saturday morning when people are trying to get out and enjoy their hike. So yeah, just plan it out.
Is there from a timing perspective, like they recommend that like removing leaves in your yard, and in spring because of the leaf pack for critters that might be underneath it, or the stalks that have flowers. So do you look at it from that perspective, like not until like after May or so, until the insects that might be overwintering in leaves?
I personally, I think it's such a small area for the entire area that you're looking at. I think when you're in neighborhoods and there's only certain spots for these animals to reproduce and live over the winter, I think it's a little bit different than when you have a huge forest and you're just trying to clear a path. It's just there's lots of them out there in the woods versus when they're in a neighborhood. And I know when they tell, like for gardening, they tell you to wait. Usually that's because it's somebody's yard and they need that space because there's house on house on house. But in the woods, I don't think it's as important. Not that it's not important, but they don't want to have a lot of leaves when you get the deep spring rains because you're just going to be, that water's just going to stay there and you're just going to start getting a muddy trail.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Right, I'm looking to see if there's any last questions. We have a few minutes left. Jim, were you raising your hand? You disappear periodically into your background, so I don't want to miss you if you're raising your hand.
I just want to make a comment about working with the youth group, the youth corps. I've done that now for about 5 years, and I find it very rewarding. And I also bring a lot of skills that they're not used to having, and guidance on what to do on maintaining trails. I know Paula said that some of I've never had a repeat leader, so maybe that's important. Group leader, and since we haven't, that it's sometimes important for us to get out there and help work with them. And the park staff management has asked me to do that as well. So I know some of the folks have been doing this longer than me, but that might be a good idea that we can help them learn too. And I like to help educate young people too. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, and just in case anybody's retired and they are looking for something to do extra, that is a position that they do hire for. So that's something that I've had a couple people like on the Appalachian Trail people, they've asked like, well, how do I, who do I contact? I'd like to, apply and maybe, work with a youth group for the summer. I mean, it's just something that might be, you are all experienced in this. Obviously you take your time in the evening to listen to this. So you'd be great for being leaders on this.
It's a good program. Sorry, I want to share something quick if I can easily get to it. We had a trail survey out, and let me just bring this over. It's not coming. You're seeing my lots of screens. Come over. I always have too many. Pam, can you bring that up? The trail survey. can make it bigger. I know that's what was happening. Let me make it full size. I got it, Pam. I made it full size. But one of the questions that I wanted to share, I thought was interesting, was people's favorite time of the year to hike. So that's what's up here now. So this was 71 people have completed the survey thus far. This is 65 responses, but October was the most favorite, September, and then followed by April, May, and June. So maybe it was in line with what you were thinking. Maybe it was a surprise to you, but still, there's no month that isn't appreciated for hiking. Well, any final words, Paula or Matt, that you would like to share?
Just thank all of you for being out there to help maintain those trails, because there's no way we can do it by ourselves.
I echo that, Matt.
Yep, I'd echo that as well, and always feel free to reach out to your local district manager and recreation forester or myself in central office.
Same here.
Excellent. Thank you both, Paula and Matt, for being here tonight. Paula, you know, when you have a chance to share with us some of the things that are on the 3R, RRR?
R3, I know. We're not supposed to call it R3 because they call the regions R1, R2, R3, and so we do RRR because it was emails were getting confusing.
We'll call it We'll share that with folks. And
when I get too many, I go,
yeah, it's built in. It's built in. And thank you, Matt, for sharing the e-bike information. And thank you to all of you for giving up an evening as well, and for being here, and for learning more and doing the great work that you do in your parks and forests where you're located. So thank you very much. Clapping to all of you. So I'm gonna stop the recording. Stop.